The sky above the wasteland of Noria was alive with fire. Endless ribbons of golden light sliced through the blackened clouds, casting long shadows over the shattered remnants of civilization. A dying sun clung to the horizon, its light bending around the jagged mountains like a final, futile attempt to hold the world together. Beneath the heavens, the survivors of this once thriving world knew only one thing: time was running out. In the heart of this crumbling realm stood the Peregrine, a sleek, silver ship that had been launched from a distant, dying star. Its mission was simple but vital: find another world, a new beginning, and save humanity from a fate it could no longer escape. Led by Captain Selene Ardent, the crew of the Peregrine had journeyed across the galaxy for months, hoping to discover a haven where life could begin anew. What they had found, however, was not salvation, but a tear in the very fabric of existence itself. Captain Hawk stood on the bridge of the Peregrine, watching as the stars flickered in and out of view. She could feel the weight of the universe pressing in on her, a vast, crushing silence that seemed to mock her every breath. The others were still preparing for their next course of action, but Selene knew one truth above all: nothing would ever be the same again. A rift had opened in the cosmos, and there was no telling what might lie beyond. Captain Selene Ardent had always believed in the impossible. She'd spent her life defying odds, challenging expectations, and venturing into the unknown. But as she stared at the darkened expanse of space ahead, she couldn't shake the feeling that what lay beyond that shimmering rift was something even she couldn't comprehend. Her crew was a small but capable group, each member handpicked for their expertise, their resilience, and their ability to work under pressure. They had been through countless trials together: alien worlds, hostile environments, and more close calls than Selene cared to count. But none of that had prepared them for the discovery that awaited them here. "Captain, we're approaching." "The anomaly," Lieutenant Callum Reyes said, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Callum had been with her from the very beginning, a quiet man with an intensity that rarely showed. His dark eyes flicked from the readouts to Selene as if seeking her guidance. "Understood, Reyes," Selene replied, her gaze fixed on the swirling mass of energy that hovered in space like a living thing. It pulsed with a strange rhythm, a beat that seemed almost organic. "Keep the ship steady. We don't know what we're dealing with." The Peregrine moved closer to the rift, and the crew braced for the unknown. The ship hummed with quiet power, its sleek hull gliding effortlessly through the void. A low buzz filled the air as the sensors began to pick up readings, and Selene's brow furrowed in concentration. The anomaly was growing stronger, its electromagnetic pulse reverberating through the ship's systems. But the readings were erratic. They didn't make sense. "It's not just a portal," Dr. Alina Voss, the ship's chief scientist, said from her station. Her tone was sharp, laced with disbelief. "This is something far more complex. It's shifting, moving through multiple dimensions at once." Selena turned toward Alina, her heart racing. "Shifting!" Alina nodded, her fingers flying over the console in rapid succession. "I can't pinpoint its origin, Captain. It's like it's alive, and it's not just one-dimensional rift, it's a crack in the very fabric of the multiverse." The word hung in the air for a moment, thick with the gravity of its implications. The multiverse was a theory, an idea that had been dismissed by many as fantasy, even by some of the most brilliant minds in science. Yet here they were, on the edge of a rift that suggested its existence was all too real. "We're approaching the event horizon," said Captain Hawk, her voice even as she wrestled with the rising tide of fear inside her. This was the moment, the point of no return. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Reyes said suddenly, his voice tense. "It's not from any known frequency. It's coming from inside the rift." Selene felt a chill creep down her spine. "Put it through!" she ordered. A crackling sound filled the bridge, followed by a voice, low, distorted, yet somehow familiar. "Captain Hawk," it said, "I've been waiting for you." Selene's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. It was a voice she hadn't heard in years, a voice she had been told would never speak again. "Jeremiah," she whispered. There was a long pause. Then the voice responded, colder than she remembered, yet unmistakable. "You should have stayed away, Selene. It's too late to turn back now." Jeremiah, her brother, the one who had vanished, without a trace all those years ago. She had mourned him, had accepted that he was lost, swallowed by the void of space during a previous mission. But here he was, speaking to her from the heart of the unknown, from a place that defied the laws of physics and reason. "Where are you?" Selene's voice shook, but she fought to keep her composure. His laughter echoed through the comms, hollow and unsettling. "Where I am doesn't matter anymore, but where you are, that's a different story. You're standing at the edge of everything, Selene, and you're about to step across." Selene's mind raced. She had to make a decision that would define not only the fate of her crew, but the future of humanity. She could feel it, a deep primal tug, pulling her toward the rift, toward her brother, toward something far beyond anything she had ever imagined. "Get ready," she said, turning to her crew. "We're going in." And with that, the Peregrine plunged, headfirst into the shifting rift, where nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare them for what awaited them on the other side. The moment the Peregrine entered the rift, it was as if the very laws of physics had been suspended. The ship trembled violently, its systems overloaded by the cascading energy that surged through its hull. Selene's knuckles turned white as she gripped the armrests of her chair, trying to maintain control in the chaos. The sound of alarms and crackling static filled the bridge, drowning out all rational thought. Everything around them felt warped, bent and twisted, like they were no longer in space, but somewhere else entirely. "Hold on, everyone!" Selene's voice cut through the noise. "Stay focused! We can make it through this!" "Captain, I can't stabilize." "The ship!" Lieutenant Reyes' voice was strained, his eyes locked on the blinking control panels. "The anomaly, it's destabilizing everything. Before he could finish, a blinding flash of light consumed the ship. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze, and then silence. The ship lurched gently, as though it had just set down on solid ground. No alarms, no static, no warning signs of imminent destruction. Selene blinked rapidly, her head spinning, as she tried to process the overwhelming sensations that filled her mind. The screens in front of her had gone dark, the instruments flashing in erratic patterns, showing no clear readings. "Where are we?" Dr. Alina Voss's voice trembled, the scientist's usual calm demeanor now replaced by unease. She was scanning the ship's surroundings with a handheld device, but the readings were far from reassuring. "We're not where we were," Reyes muttered, adjusting his console with a sharp flick of his fingers. "But I don't think we're in the same dimension anymore. This place doesn't match any known coordinates." A sudden jolt threw them all to the side, and the ship groaned as if it were alive. Selene steadied herself, pushing up from her chair. She was a seasoned captain, used to the unexpected, but even she felt a sense of foreboding as she turned to face her crew. "Status report," she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "Thrusters are down," Reyes reported, his voice clipped. "The ship's core is still online, but I'm not sure how long we can maintain full power with the damage." "Energy. Readings are fluctuating," Alina added. "Something's interfering with our systems. The gravitational pull here is irregular. It doesn't make sense." Selene's gaze shifted to the view screen. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. Outside, the ship, the universe they had just entered, was nothing like the cold void they had come from. Vast swirling fields of light and color surrounded them. At first glance, it appeared as though they had entered a nebula of unimaginable size. But upon closer inspection, the colors were shifting, changing, almost like they were alive. The stars they had once known were now distant pinpricks of light, their positions shifting erratically across the sky. And beneath it all, there was a world of landscapes and skies that twisted in ways Selene couldn't even begin to fathom. The ground was a swirling mass of crystal-like formations, glowing with an ethereal light that pulsed in time with the strange energy around them. Towering structures jutted out from the land, looking like colossal spires of ice. Impossibly smooth and jagged, suspended in mid-air, as though gravity itself had been altered. It was beautiful and terrifying. "This is impossible," Alina whispered, her breath catching in awe and fear. "Can you get us out of here?" Reyes asked, his voice tense. "Captain, we need to find a way to leave. Now!" But Selene wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on something far more unsettling than the landscape outside. From the corner of her vision, she saw it, a shadow darting across the distant horizon. A shape moving too quickly to be natural, but too large to be a mere trick of the light. "Did anyone else see that?" Selena asked, her voice low. "I did," Reyes replied, his face pale. "Something's out there, something big." Before anyone could respond, the ship shuddered again, more violently this time. A low, guttural rumble reverberated through the hull. The walls of the ship vibrated as if they were being pulled and stretched by some invisible force. Alina let out a sharp gasp. "The fabric of this place, it's alive!" she shouted. "It's warping! Prepare for impact!" Selene barked. They barely had time to react before the ship was tossed through the air like a leaf caught in a storm. The view screen flashed white as they plunged toward the surface of the unknown world. Selene fought to maintain control, her hands dancing across the console, but it was no use. The Peregrine had no control, no power. Then, with a sickening lurch, the ship slammed into the ground. The impact was deafening. For a long moment, Selene didn't know if she was alive or dead. Her body had been thrown across the bridge, and the world around her was a blur of flashing lights and broken metal. Groaning, she pushed herself up, her ears ringing as she tried to make sense of the chaos. One of the consoles was smoking, the other flickering erratically. Her crew, shaken but alive, was starting to regain their composure. "Report," she demanded, her voice hoarse. "We've crash-landed," Reyes said, his voice shaky. "Damage is severe. The ship's hull is intact, but we're stuck here." "I can't get any readings from the outside," Alina added. "The atmosphere here, it's not like anything we've ever seen. It's unstable. The air itself seems to be shifting." Selene's mind raced. They were stranded. But worse, they weren't alone. The creature from before. She could feel its presence, like a dark cloud hanging over them. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Someone was watching them. "Captain," Reyes said suddenly, his voice quiet with disbelief. "There's something out there, something moving toward us." Selene looked out the viewport. The sky had darkened in the short time since their crash, and the landscape beyond was a surreal blend of shifting crystals and strange glowing vegetation. And in the distance, there it was, a massive figure, standing tall like a shadow against the pulsing sky. It was humanoid, but its proportions were wrong. Its limbs were too long, its body unnaturally elongated, and its face was hidden beneath a hood of swirling mist. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as Selene locked eyes with the creature, if it even had eyes. It didn't move, but its presence was undeniable, its gaze, though unseen, burning through her very soul. "What is that?" Alina asked, voice trembling. Selene swallowed hard, her mind racing. I don't know, but we need to find out. The massive figure in the distance stood unmoving, a silhouette against the strange, shifting sky. Selene's heart thudded in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. There was something ancient in that figure, something primordial that seemed to hum with an energy she couldn't comprehend. We need to get a closer look, Selene said, her voice low but firm. Prepare yourselves, we don't know what we're dealing with here. Her crew responded quickly, each member gathering their gear and securing what they could from the wreckage. The Peregrine had taken a heavy blow when it crashed, but the ship's hull was intact, providing some protection from the harsh environment. Still, Selene knew they couldn't remain inside the ship for long. Whatever this place was, it was unstable, and they needed answers. Captain, Dr. Alina Voss said as she glanced at the data streaming across her handheld device, the atmosphere is unlike anything we've encountered before. It's corrosive on a molecular level. It's eating away at the ship's outer coating. Already, we'll need to make our way to the surface quickly, Selene replied. Once we're out there, we stay low and move fast. No detours. Agreed, Reyes said, his face grim as he checked his weapon, a standard-issue plasma pistol. We don't know if that thing is a friend or foe, but we need to be prepared. As they stepped out of the Peregrine and onto the alien terrain, a strange sensation washed over Selene, like the world itself was breathing. The ground beneath their feet was soft but firm, a crystalline substance that shimmered underfoot. The air was thick, almost alive, as it crackled with energy that Selene could feel in her bones. It wasn't just the atmosphere that felt wrong, it was the very essence of this place, as though the laws of nature had been twisted to fit some unknown purpose. They moved quickly, keeping low to the ground, shadows against the unnatural light that bathed the landscape. As they approached the towering figure, its outline became clearer, and the full scale of it hit them. The being, if it could even be called that, stood at least 30 feet tall, with limbs that were impossibly long, bending at odd angles. Its body was cloaked in swirling mist, its form shifting and warping like a mirage. The only part of it that seemed solid was its head, a featureless, smooth expanse of dark energy, like a void where light itself was reluctant to tread. It's not human, Alina murmured, her voice tinged with awe and fear. No, it's not, Selene replied, her eyes narrowing. But it's waiting for us. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to vibrate. The landscape around them flickered, like an old film reel, and the ground rippled beneath their feet. At times, it felt as though the very horizon was moving, bending as if the world itself were a liquid that had been poured into a mold. We're close, Reyes said, his voice barely above a whisper. Whatever this thing is, it's not acting like an animal. It's like it's watching us. I don't think it's just watching, Selene said quietly, her instincts telling her that they were stepping into something much bigger than a mere alien encounter. The feeling of being observed, of being studied, was undeniable. She didn't like it. We'll approach with caution, no sudden movements. They moved as one, a tight unit, their eyes on the towering figure ahead. The creature, if it could be called that, remained still, as if waiting for them to come closer. There was no sound, no movement except for the distant hum that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. And then, just as they were within a few yards of the towering being, something extraordinary happened. The ground beneath them cracked, with a sound like thunder splitting wide open, and a massive tremor shook the land. For a split second, Selene thought they were all going to be swallowed up by the earth itself, but as quickly as it came, the tremor stopped, and the ground settled into a profound stillness. "What the hell was that?" Reyes shouted, his weapon. raised, scanning the horizon. "Stay calm," Selene ordered, though her heart was pounding. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew they had to remain composed. If they panicked, they'd be lost. The creature's mist-like form began to shift, swirling more intensely. And then, to Selene's utter shock, it spoke. A shock. "Welcome, Selene Hawk," the voice echoed in her mind, clear but distant, like a whisper carried across an endless void. The words sent a shiver down her spine, and she froze. "You know me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We know." "All who enter this world," the voice responded, its tone impossibly deep. "You and your crew are not the first to come seeking the truth, but you are the first to have crossed the threshold without knowing the cost." The air seemed to pulse with the weight of the words, and Selene felt the weight of the presence before her, not just in the physical sense, but in a deeper, almost cosmic way, as though she was being watched by something that transcended time and space. "Why are you here?" Selene asked, her voice steady despite the unease curling in her stomach. The misty figure slowly lowered its head, its long limbs shifting like liquid. It took a step forward, and Selene instinctively stepped back. The energy it radiated was overwhelming, pressing against her chest as though it were trying to read her very soul. "You seek to return home," it said, "to the world you left behind, but the path you have chosen is one of no return. Your world is dying, Captain Hawk, and you cannot save it by simply crossing through the veil of space. The answers you seek lie deeper, much deeper. You must choose. Will you save your world, or will you let it fall and allow this world to flourish in its place?" The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment Selene didn't know how to respond. What did this creature mean? Could they really return home? Could they save their universe? Or was it too late? "You are not alone in your quest," the voice continued. "Others have come before you, those who sought to bend the will of the multiverse to their desires. They failed, and you, Captain, must decide whether you will repeat their mistakes." A flicker of recognition sparked in Selena's mind. The voice, the reference to those who had come before them. Jeremiah, her brother. The figure before her seemed to sense her thoughts, its form flickering in the air like a mirage on the verge of collapse. "You are connected," the voice said as though reading her mind. "But you must understand, even the strongest bonds can fracture when tested by the forces that govern reality. Will you be strong enough to save what is yours, or will you succumb to the same darkness that consumed those who came before you?" Selene's heart thundered in her chest. The weight of the decision was already pressing down on her, even though she barely understood the stakes. But one thing was clear: this place, this world, wasn't just a destination. It was a test, and her crew, her people, were standing at the precipice. "We're not leaving without answers," Selene said, her voice cold and resolute. The misty figure seemed to nod, and the voice that followed was both a warning and a promise. "Then you must seek the source, the heart of this world. There you will find what you need, but be warned, once you enter, you may never return. The air felt heavier as Selene and her crew walked away from the towering figure, its gaze lingering on them like a shadow that would never fully leave. They had been given an ultimatum: find the heart of the world where the answers lay, or risk losing everything. The creature had promised them that the answers they sought were buried deep within this strange land. But the deeper they ventured into the alien terrain, the more distorted and disorienting the world became. It was as if reality itself was bending to its will, reshaping itself with every step they took. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift, glowing faintly with energy that pulsed in time with their movements. The sky above was a swirling mass of colors, ever-changing and impossible to track. Every time Selene thought she saw a clear path, the landscape shifted again, making it feel as though they were walking in circles. "Do you see that?" Dr. Alina Voss asked suddenly, her voice tense. She had stopped in her tracks, staring ahead. With wide eyes, Selene followed her gaze, squinting into the distance. At first, she saw nothing but the strange, fractured horizon. But then, through the shifting veil of colors, something appeared. Something that looked like a structure, an immense tower reaching high into the sky. It was difficult to discern its exact shape, but it seemed to pulse with an unnatural light, casting long, eerie shadows across the land. "I don't know if I'd call it a structure," Reyes muttered, his voice laced with doubt. "More like a monument, a beacon, a warning." Selene nodded, her heart pounding. That was their destination, the heart of the world. "We need to move," she said, her voice tight. "That's where the answers are. We don't have much time." The crew pressed forward, their movements tense and cautious. The further they went, the more unsettling the world became. The air felt thicker with each passing step, and strange sounds echoed from the shadows. At times, Selene could have sworn she heard whispering voices just out of reach, an unintelligible murmur that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. But when she turned to look, there was nothing. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the base of the tower, or whatever it was. Up close, it was far more magnificent and terrifying than they had anticipated. The structure loomed over them like some ancient forgotten god, its surface covered in smooth, crystalline patterns that shimmered with a light that was both beautiful and unsettling. The tower stretched upward beyond the limits of their vision, lost in the swirling chaos of the sky above. "This is it," Alina breathed. "The heart of the world. I can feel the energy coming from it. It's overwhelming." Selene surveyed the structure, her instincts alert. The air was thick with power, but there was something else beneath it. A darkness that seemed to pulse within the heart of the tower, as if something was waiting for them. She turned to her crew. "We don't know what we're about to face inside," she said. "Stay close, watch each other's backs, and don't let your guard down. Whatever this place is, it's not friendly." Reyes nodded, his expression grim. "We're in this together, Captain." With that, they moved toward the entrance, a wide archway that seemed to open on its own as they approached. It was as though the tower itself recognized their presence, welcoming them into its depths. The air inside was even more oppressive, charged with a strange energy that made Selene's skin tingle. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, lines and symbols that shifted when she looked at them, never remaining the same for more than a moment. "It's like it's alive," Alina murmured, her eyes scanning the carvings. "These markings, they're not just decorative. They're part of the structure, integrated into its very design." Selene frowned. "What do they mean?" "I'm not sure," Alina replied, her voice filled with awe. "But it's like a language, a living language. Every time I look at it, the symbols change, adapting. They seem to respond to us." The crew fell silent, their footsteps echoing in the vast, hollow space as they ventured deeper into the tower. The further they went, the more surreal the environment became. The walls were no longer solid. They shifted and rippled like liquid, warping and bending around them. Occasionally, flashes of light streaked across the air, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. "This is impossible," Reyes muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "We're walking through a living organism." "I think it's more than that," Selene said, her voice soft. "It's not just alive, it's conscious." They reached a large chamber deep within the tower. In the center of the room was a massive crystal, pulsing with an eerie, dark energy. It stood on a pedestal, its surface shimmering with an unnatural light, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. The energy radiating from it was overwhelming. Selene could feel it in her chest, like a heartbeat that matched the rhythm of her own. "This is it," Alina said, stepping forward, her eyes wide with awe and fear. This is what's powering the world. This is the source. Selene stared at the crystal. It wasn't just a power source. It was alive, pulsating with an energy that seemed to flow and shift in waves. It was beautiful in its own way, but there was something undeniably dangerous about it. "Can you analyze it?" Selene asked, her voice tense. Alina hesitated. "I can try, but the energy coming off it is unstable. I don't know if my equipment will be able to handle it." Selene nodded, her eyes never leaving the crystal. "Do it anyway. We need to know what this is." As Alina worked, Reyes stood watch, his weapon at the ready. Selene paced, her mind racing. This crystal, this heart of the world, was connected to everything. To the energy of this place, to the fate of their universe, and to the being they had encountered outside. It was all tied together, and somehow her brother Jeremiah was at the center of it all. He had to be. "Captain," Alina's voice broke through her thoughts. "I've got something." Selene turned to her, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is it?" Alina took a deep breath. "This crystal, it's not just a power source, it's a gateway, a portal, but not like any we've encountered. It's a dimensional rift, a tear in the fabric of space and time." Selene's blood ran cold. "A portal? To where?" Alina's eyes widened. "I don't know, but it's linked to the very structure of this world. And I think it's linked to your brother." Selene's pulse quickened. "Jeremiah?" Alina nodded. "I'm picking up traces of his DNA, not exactly, but there's a match. This crystal is somehow connected to him, to his presence in this world. It's like he's been manipulating it." Selene's heart sank. "He's been here all along." Reyes stepped forward, his face hardening. "What are we supposed to do now? This thing could destroy everything." "We need to shut it down," Selene said, her voice fierce. "Whatever Jeremiah is trying to do, we can't let it succeed. We have to stop him before it's too late." Alina hesitated. "But how? The energy here is unstable. If we try to destroy the crystal, it could destabilize the entire structure, maybe even the entire world." "Then we find another way," Selene replied, determination flooding her chest. "We'll figure it out, but we can't let him use this to destroy everything." The tension in the room was palpable. They had come this far, and the truth was finally within their reach. But with it came an undeniable realization. Their journey was no longer just about finding a way home. It was about preventing the destruction of everything they knew. And as Selene stood there, staring at the pulsing crystal, she knew the hardest part was still to come. The air inside the chamber was thick with tension. The glowing crystal at the center of the room pulsed in a steady rhythm, its dark energy radiating outward in waves that felt like a steady pressure on Selene's chest. The walls, once fluid and shifting, had frozen in place, their patterns of symbols now sharp and clear. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Alina's hands hovered over the console, her brow furrowed in concentration as she continued her analysis of the crystal. Her voice was strained as she spoke, still trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "There's no doubt about it," Alina said, her voice quiet but urgent. "This crystal is more than just a portal. It's a nexus, a focal point that bridges realities. It's acting as a conduit between this universe and your brother's manipulations. Somehow, he's using it to destabilize the boundaries of both worlds." Selene's mind raced. "How do we stop him? How do we shut it down before she could finish her thought? The entire chamber shook violently. The crystal's pulse quickened, each beat of its energy sending ripples through the air, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. Selene's first instinct was to grab onto something solid, but there was nothing to hold. It was as though the entire room was coming apart at the seams. "Captain!" Reyes shouted, grabbing her arm. "We need to move, now!" Alina barely had time to react as the tremors intensified. The crystal flickered, its energy fluctuating wildly, and a low, otherworldly hum began to fill the room, vibrating in their bones. "We don't have time for a plan," Selene said, her voice tight with determination. "We're running out of options. We need to find Jeremiah, and we need to stop him before the entire multiverse collapses in on itself." But as Selene looked around the chamber, she realized the true gravity of their situation. The walls were no longer just shimmering. They were buckling, bending inward, as if they were being pulled by an invisible force. The portal, once a clear and distant goal, now seemed to be in danger of consuming everything. "We're too late," Alina whispered, her voice cracking. "It's already begun. The fracture, it's spreading. We can't fix this by shutting down the crystal alone. We need to find him, Jeremiah. He's the key." Selene clenched her fists, her mind whirling. She had known this moment was coming, the moment when the line between their reality and this one would become so thin that they could no longer distinguish the two. But now, as the world around them began to warp and twist in impossible ways, she felt a deep, unshakable fear in her gut. "There's no time to waste," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos that surrounded them. "We need to move now." Reyes nodded, his eyes scanning the shifting environment. "The portal. It's connected to the tower. We can use it to get closer, but we'll have to move fast. If we stay here too long, we'll be pulled into it." Selene turned to Alina, her gaze firm. "How do we get to Jeremiah?" Alina's fingers danced across her console, tapping through screens at lightning speed. "There's a path leading. Deeper into the tower, a set of tunnels perhaps, the crystal. It's resonating with the energy of this place. If we follow it, we should be able to track his movements." The room trembled once again, more violently this time, as the entire structure seemed to shudder with a great, unseen force. The walls buckled further, and the air itself began to twist and warp, like heat waves rising from an oven. It was as if the fabric of reality itself was being stretched and torn, and they were at the center of it all. "There's no turning back now," Selene said, her voice sharp as steel. "Let's move." They raced through the chamber, the shifting, walls closing in behind them. Selene could hear the echoes of her own footsteps reverberating through the corridors, their sound distorted as the space itself began to twist in strange, unsettling ways. The reality around them bent and folded like a torn sheet of paper, and Selene could feel the ground beneath her feet pull at her as though the very laws of physics were being rewritten. Alina's voice crackled through her earpiece. "I'm getting a strong signal from deeper within the tower. We're close. Keep moving." The crew pressed forward, determined to find Jeremiah before the world tore itself apart. Every step they took seemed to bring them closer to the center of the chaos, where the lines between dimensions blurred and faded. The halls around them were like a labyrinth. Every corner revealed a new, mind-bending landscape. Selene's mind was struggling to process what she saw. Floating islands, rivers that flowed upward, and trees whose branches seemed to grow in reverse. "This place is falling apart," Reyes said, his voice strained. "It's like a nightmare." "This isn't a dream," Selene replied. "It's real, and we're running out of time." They reached an enormous door, ornate and glowing with the same dark energy as the crystal. It was massive, far too large for any human to have constructed, and it was covered in intricate, shifting symbols that seemed to pulse with the same energy that had destabilized the entire world. "This is it," Alina said, her voice tight with apprehension. "Jeremiah's inside." Selene nodded, her hand resting on the door's surface. "Let's go." As the door opened, they were greeted by a sight that both amazed and horrified them. The room was unlike anything they had ever seen, part cathedral, part laboratory. It was vast, stretching impossibly high into the air, the walls lined with strange, shimmering devices that hummed with an unnatural energy. In the center of the room stood Jeremiah, his back turned to them. He was focused on the crystal, his hands raised as if controlling it. He didn't turn as they entered, but Selene could feel his presence, familiar, yet utterly alien. Her heart raced as she took a step forward, her voice cold as steel. Jeremiah. The sound of her voice. He turned, his eyes meeting hers. For a brief moment, Selene saw the brother she had once known, the boy she had grown up with, the man she had mourned. But that image quickly faded, replaced by something darker, something twisted. "You shouldn't have come, Selene," Jeremiah said, his voice calm. But there was a hardness in it, a finality. "This is the way it has to be. This is the only way." Selene's blood ran cold. "The only way for what?" Jeremiah's lips curled into a smile. "For everything to be remade. This universe, your world, it's a broken thing. Do you not see it? This is the true reality, the one that has always existed beneath the veil. I've come to help it flourish, to merge both worlds into one, to bring order to the chaos. Only then will the universe know peace." "You're insane," Selene spat, her fists clenched. "You'll destroy everything. You can't just rewrite reality." "You misunderstand," Jeremiah said, his tone strangely detached. "This isn't destruction, it's evolution. We're simply pushing forward to what has always been meant to happen. The universe doesn't end, it transforms. And you'll be the one to control it," Selene finished, her voice hard. Jeremiah's eyes glinted with a dangerous light. "Of course, someone has to." He raised his hands, and the crystal flared to life, its energy rippling outward like a shockwave. Selene could feel the air change, the very fabric of space trembling as the rift between worlds grew wider, stronger. The reality around them warped, stretched thin, like an ancient painting that had been torn at the edges. "You have no idea what you're doing," Selene said, stepping forward. "This is bigger than you, bigger than any of us." Jeremiah's smile never wavered. "I know exactly what I'm doing, but it's too late to stop it now." Selene's heart pounded as she realized the full extent of his plan and how close. They were to the point of no return. The choice she would have to make, whether to sacrifice her world to save the other or to risk the collapse of both, was now looming over them, and there was no more time to waste. No more time. The air in the chamber crackled with an intensity that made the hairs on Selene's neck stand on end. The crystal before them flared, its energy surging outward like a wave of molten fire, sending ripples through the very fabric of reality. The ground beneath their feet quivered, and the walls began to warp once more, bending in unnatural directions. The world around them was no longer a place of logic. It was a place of pure chaos, where anything could happen, and time itself seemed to stretch and twist like rubber. Selene's breath was shallow as she faced Jeremiah, her brother, the man who had once been her closest ally, her closest family. But now, all that was left was a stranger, someone consumed by an ambition that could destroy everything. "Stop this, Jeremiah," she said, her voice hard. "You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing." Jeremiah's eyes gleamed with a strange kind of serenity. "Oh, I understand perfectly, Selene. This is the path forward. Both worlds, yours and mine, are bound to collapse. It's inevitable. But if we merge them, we can rebuild it all, a new reality where chaos is no more. No more destruction, no more suffering, only peace, only order." "You're wrong," Selene said, shaking her head. "You're playing with forces you don't understand. You'll destroy both universes, not fix them." Jeremiah's smile never wavered. "You don't get it, do you? Peace comes with sacrifice. You can't build a new world without breaking the old one, but I'm willing to pay the price. You should be too. The words hit Selene like a slap in the face. Sacrifice. That was always the answer, wasn't it? The cold, calculated choice. To destroy the familiar in the hopes of creating something better. But at what cost? And who would pay that cost? I will never agree with this, Selene spat, her anger burning through her fear. I won't let you destroy everything. You already have, Jeremiah said softly, almost regretfully. This isn't just about me, Selene. This is bigger than both of us, bigger than anything we've ever known. The crystal behind him pulsed again, and Selene could feel the heat of it, the raw energy that surged through her veins, threatening to tear apart everything she had ever known. She could sense it. The collapse of reality was already in motion. The boundaries between dimensions were fraying, unraveling at the edges, and with every moment that passed, the risk of everything being swallowed into nothingness grew. Alina's voice broke through the chaos, her words sharp and filled with urgency. Captain, we need to do something now. The energy from that crystal is destabilizing everything. If we don't act quickly, we'll all be pulled into the rift, and this entire universe will collapse into nothingness. Selene's mind raced, her thoughts clashing like thunder. The only way to stop Jeremiah, to stop the merger of the worlds, was to shut down the crystal. But to do that, they would have to risk everything. If they destroyed it, they would also destroy the very fabric that was holding this dimension together. If they didn't, both universes would unravel. Jeremiah stepped forward, his hands still raised, manipulating the crystal. The air around them shimmered with a supernatural glow. I'm sorry you don't understand, Selene. I truly am. But this is the only way forward. This is the way to save everything. Save it? Selene's voice trembled with the weight of the truth. You're not saving anything. You're enslaving it. You're binding us all to your vision. And if you succeed, everything will be gone. Jeremiah's eyes softened, but there was a coldness to his expression that made Selene's heart break. I never wanted to hurt you, but you don't see it. We're beyond the point of no return. I can't undo it. I can't go back. Then, let me stop you, Selene said. Let me stop you before it's too late. Before he could respond, a violent shockwave blasted through the chamber. The crystal pulsed again, its energy erupting outward like a shockwave, knocking everyone off their feet. The force was so great that Selene felt her body crash against the ground, the world spinning out of control. The chamber was shaking violently. Now, the walls cracking and splintering as the rift between the two universes widened. Alina scrambled to her feet, clutching the control panel. The portal is opening wider. It's pulling everything in. We need to destroy the crystal now. Wait! Reyes shouted. There's another way! Selene looked at him, her mind racing. What are you talking about? Reyes's eyes were wide with realization. The crystal is the heart of the world, yes, but it's also a conduit. If we can redirect its energy, we can reverse the flow. We can channel it back to where it belongs, without destroying both worlds in the process. But we'll need to sacrifice something, a vessel, someone to absorb the energy. Selene's blood ran cold. You're talking about us. It's the only way, Reyes said, his voice heavy. One of us has to absorb the energy. The process will close the rift and stabilize both worlds, but the cost, it's immense. The room fell silent, and Selene's mind spun. This was their only option. If they didn't act now, the worlds would collide, destroying everything in their wake. But the price would be one of them. Jeremiah, sensing their hesitation, turned toward them, his face hardening. You still don't understand. You still think there's a way to stop it? There isn't. This is the end. The beginning of a new world. No, Selene said, rising to her feet with a defiant glare. You're wrong. We won't let you destroy everything. With a fierce resolve, Selene turned to Alina. Can you control the crystal's energy? Can you focus it enough to redirect? It without destroying everything? Alina nodded, her face pale but determined. I can try, but we'll need to act fast. The rift is expanding too quickly. Selene knew that this was their last chance. There was no more room for hesitation. If they didn't act, if they didn't make the ultimate sacrifice, both worlds would fall into chaos. But who would make that sacrifice? I'll do it, Reyes said, stepping forward with a look of quiet resolve. Selene's heart clenched. No, you can't. You have a family. Which is exactly why I'm doing this, Reyes interrupted, his eyes meeting hers. I'm willing to give everything for them, for all of us. We don't have a choice anymore. One of us has to take the energy, and I'm ready. Selene reached for him, but he held up his hand, stopping her. This is the only way, Captain. We can save them. We can save everything, but I won't let the universe fall apart for the sake of my own life. His words hit her like a punch to the stomach. There was no more time, no more arguing, only the painful reality of the choice before them. We'll do it together, Selene said, her voice trembling with emotion. We'll find a way to make it work. We'll save both worlds. But Jeremiah's voice interrupted her once again, filled with cold finality. You can't. It's too late. The process has already begun. The room seemed to shake even more violently as the energy from the crystal spiraled out of control. The rift between the universes was widening, the space around them stretching like a tear in fabric. Selene could feel the pull, the magnetic force drawing her into the vortex. No, Selene shouted, her voice resolute. We won't let you do this. With one final, decisive action, Alina hit a sequence of buttons on her console, directing the energy from the crystal toward Reyes. The surge of power was immediate, a burst of light so intense that it blinded them all. Selene reached out, but it was too late. Reyes had already stepped into the flow of energy. In an instant, the rift began to close, but the price had been paid. The light from the crystal faded, leaving behind a profound silence that reverberated through the chamber. The walls, once pulsing with unnatural energy, had stilled, their shifting patterns now locked in place. The rift between the two worlds, its jagged, unstable edges, began to close, its edges folding inward like a torn page being smoothed out. The weight of Reyes' sacrifice hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Selene staggered to her feet, her eyes locked on the spot where Reyes had stood only moments before. The light had consumed him entirely, and now there was nothing but a faint shimmer in the air where he had once been. Reyes. Alina's voice was barely a whisper, filled with disbelief. He's gone. Selene swallowed hard, a lump rising in her throat. She had known what needed to be done. She had understood the cost, but nothing could prepare her for the finality of it. Reyes had given his life to close the rift, to stabilize the energy that threatened to tear both worlds apart. He had sacrificed himself so that they could live, so that everyone they loved would survive. His sacrifice saved us all, Selene said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. But I can't believe he's gone. Alina nodded slowly, her face pale, but her expression resolute. We couldn't have done it without him. He made the ultimate choice. There was a pause, the silence of the chamber settling around them like a heavy blanket. The crystal had stopped pulsing, and the rift had completely closed, sealing both universes away from one another. The worlds had been saved, but at what cost? We'll never forget what he did, Selene added, her voice filled with quiet resolve, and we'll make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. The crew stood in solemn silence for a long moment, each of them processing the weight of what had just transpired. They had saved two worlds, yes, but they had lost one of their own in the process. Reyes' absence was now a void, an empty space in their hearts that would never be filled. His death was a bitter victory. Alina was the first to speak, her voice soft but steady. "What happens now, Captain?" Selene looked around the chamber, her mind still reeling from the events. The alien world was quiet now, no longer shifting and warping as it had before. The crystal had lost its power, the very essence of the energy that had been tearing reality apart, now extinguished, but there was still a lingering sense of unease in the air. "We rebuild," Selene said, her voice filled with determination. "We rebuild everything. We return to our world, and we make sure this never happens again." The journey back to their universe was quiet, the weight of what they had lost hanging heavily in the air. As they boarded their ship and set course for home, there were no words for the grief they all shared. They had stopped an unimaginable disaster, but in doing so, they had lost one of their own. The stars outside the window seemed to shimmer more brightly than before, their light cutting through the darkness of space. But for Selene, the stars felt distant, unreachable. The universe had been saved, but at a cost that would forever leave a shadow on their hearts. As the ship neared the familiar orbit of Earth, Selene stood by the window, staring out at the planet that seemed so small, so fragile in the vastness of space. She thought of Reyes, of his smile, his courage, and she knew that they would honor his memory. Alina walked up beside her, her voice soft. "He'd be proud of what we've done. Proud of what we've become." "I know," Selene said quietly, "but it doesn't feel enough, not without him." They sat in silence for a long time, staring at the blue planet below them. It was a world that would continue spinning, oblivious to the sacrifices made to save it. But Selene knew that, for all their efforts, the universe would never be the same again. The world was saved, but the scars of the journey would last forever.